Thank you, Charlotte, and welcome everybody. Good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are, or good evening even. My name is Rob Kerr. I'm a senior associate with QUEST, and I thank you for coming today. I see we've got a good number of people, over 50 on the call. Thank you for coming. I today would like to run through over the next hour and hopefully some time for Q&A. Some of the work that I have had the honor of doing on behalf of QUEST based out of New Brunswick, looking at the economic development and economic impact links to community energy planning or similar in municipalities and communities striving to become smart energy communities. So I have about 24 slides here. I will walk through them with you, and these are a summary of some of the work we've done. I pulled this slide actually out of deep in the middle of my deck to just start the conversation slightly different way than I do typically. You know, I saw the registration list. I'll make the assumption that almost everybody on this call is an advocate for smart energy communities or elements of smart energy communities, and many of us are familiar with the many benefits of the aspects of smart energy community, and we've come to know them well. There's a great many of them, and we talk about them in different ways depending on our audiences, especially within our community and the many stakeholders that rally around smart energy communities. I want to sort of look at this list in a bit more of a challenging way, and that is there's so many benefits that it's sometimes hard to maintain a strong value proposition for all of them because they can be difficult to quantify, be difficult to find reference material that bolsters the local aspects of these many benefits. This particular project focuses in on this first column around economic impact. And again, there's strong intuition around the economic impact, but we want to start articulating it further. And that's really was the purpose of the project that we did in New Brunswick. So today I'd like to talk a little bit more about that project, how we ran it, and our goal to rally around a definition of what we mean by a transitioning energy economy. An understanding of the scale of that economy. How big is it? How big could it be? How big is it going to be? And most importantly, how jobs are created, jobs being arguably the #1 metric for determining economic impact. And how municipalities and their community stakeholders can actually enable that economy for their local benefit and job creation. And lastly, we have a little bit more of a empirical approach to the project where we talk about how you actually estimate job creation with the quantified numbers that are embedded in community energy plans. And as QUEST has reported, and many of you know, there's hundreds and hundreds of community energy plans completed across the country and many more underway. Before I go on, there's a link here at the bottom where all of the content of our research is available on the QUEST Canada website. If you'll see a main link on the front page under resources, and that'll take you to this project and all the details that were part of our deliverables. So a little bit about QUEST. I don't have to spend time here. I think many or most of you know what QUEST is all about. Just some highlights here that really link to the work, which is around integration of efficiency, renewable energy, and clean and affordability. So there's some economic words here around what smart energy communities can do for an economy. And I think there's also some strong understanding that livable communities are economically healthy communities. As you also may know, that QUEST has principles, technical and policy principles. I just want to highlight a few. Again, these are all integrated, but I do want to leverage from 2 of them right at the beginning and end of this list around improving efficiency. And efficiency takes on a broader meaning when you include the term economic efficiency, leverage from energy efficiency. And right to the far end around pursuing policy and program stability that really is about enabling that transitioning energy market I referred to earlier. A little bit about the project. I think I want to point out that what this project was not about, was an academic exercise around economics. I did look at a lot of academic research and journals and papers. But the goal was to improve the understanding and the value proposition for implementing CEPs. What we do know, and many of you, if not all of you, play a role in advocating for transitioning energy economy and smart energy communities, and are constantly communicating the value proposition of all or aspects of those transitions. So we want to, in New Brunswick, we had a good start for two reasons. One was we had a supporter in the Environmental Trust Fund to do the project, and New Brunswick enjoys a reputation of having the most community energy plants per capita than any province in the country, over 50 of them. So we had a basis of empirical data to work from to try and raise the bar around this conversation of linking the economy to community energy planning. So what came out of it was some information that helped support communication packages, particularly for local governments, but not exclusively. There's many stakeholders in every community that are rallying around community energy plans. We had a group of participating municipalities, and I'll refer to a few of them later on, that helped us do this work. And lastly, answer the simple question to municipalities is, what is their role in fostering forward and implementing and seeing the results of the aspirations in a community energy plan? And we'll talk a little bit about that. And I've alluded to most of this. It was research-based, a lot of focused workshops and feedback, and then provincial dissemination, where we've talked a lot to the broader municipal community and their stakeholders in New Brunswick. And what we're doing right this minute, in this webinar, is an ongoing effort to disseminate the outcomes. So this next section, we'll talk a little bit about what we mean by a transitioning energy economy, and use the very simple language of local to central to local. So we're taking a bit of a historical context here, and I want to thank Kerr, who I've worked with on a number of projects for helping develop these next few slides. To tell a bit of a story. And so now we're kind of moving to a narrative, a fairly high narrative. Most folks are familiar with the history of their communities, and if you look at it through an energy lens, you can see that those communities were established and built on energy systems that were extremely local. They relied on thermal from local wood, water, and animal labor. So these are very picturesque pictures that you see in tourist brochures, etc. But as you can see through a different lens, every one of these pictures have an energy aspect. And over time, and this is to me personally the most interesting part of doing research, historical research around energy, you can see the movement towards centralization of energy generation and distribution infrastructure, and some of the challenges that come with it. These are from New Brunswick, some of the first switching stations. There was actually demand-side management activity taking place in the 20s here, and there's a little newspaper article here around saving electricity to not overburden the delivery infrastructure. And at the bottom is a picture from my hometown and where I'm talking to you from right now, and that's the city of Guelph. That's a coal gas plant that goes back to the turn of the century and a few decades beyond. And that coal gas was used to create a street lighting system in our downtown core, one of the first in the region. And I point this out to make the economic development link. That allowed merchants in our downtown core to operate more hours, and for shoppers to engage with them in longer time periods. So there's an economic link. And then, of course, that informed the culture we know. And this is another very fascinating thing. You know, the culture that we understand is around reliable and the promise of cheap, reliable energy and electricity, particularly with these examples. And some of us of a certain age will even remember going to the CNE in Toronto and having a whole pavilion devoted to the wonder of electricity and how it can make our lives better, and did make our lives better. This picture in the bottom comes from New Brunswick. It's the first generating plant in New Brunswick, and no surprise, there's a linen mill right beside it. And we start talking about that link again to economy and culture. And then we leap ahead to more modern times and we see some pictures of very large infrastructure systems generating and delivering energy to us. And I don't need to describe each of these pictures, but this is our understanding of today. And this is really the jump off point from local to highly central, and talking about the implications of these kinds of generation and delivery infrastructure systems. What do they look like? This comes, and I think Oakville might be on the call today, and I want to thank them for providing this. This is a Sankey diagram for those who might not know the terminology. This comes from empirical data in Oakville. I was part of a project there where we looked at how energy arrives at the city and how it's used, and an understanding of the efficiency of that. So without going to each of those lines and describing them, I'll just point the gray lines, the light and dark gray lines, account for wasted energy. And that's the fundamental point to be made around centralized energy generation and delivery systems, is that they are efficient in many ways in terms of fueling our economies and our culture, but have inherently high degrees of efficiency built into them. Why do local communities care about that? Because that inefficiency takes place to a large degree outside the boundaries of their communities, and the answer is very simple, that they pay for that. I say they, I mean all of the energy users in any given community pay for that inefficiency, and it's reflected in their energy bills. And that's why it's very important, even though you might be analyzing something local, to understand the inefficiency of a system delivering energy to that local community. Another illustration of the same point, really, this comes from my hometown in Guelph, and this is not a secret. In fact, this comes right out of an annual report of our local electricity utility. And it describes how a typical energy bill of $122 gets distributed to pay for all the elements of bringing electricity to an end user. And the simple point is about 80% of that leaves the community to support the infrastructure that I showed you earlier in some sample pictures. And so that's an illustration of, yes, we do pay for it. And this is an important part of the local economy lens, which has dollars earned by end users leaving the community to allow for them to receive and use the energy that's delivered to them. So we're setting the foundation for an argument here. When we look at a description of what we mean by a smart energy community, and this is from the QUEST website, that anybody from QUEST would recognize this very well. It describes all the elements of what defines a smart energy community. Now, I'm not here to go into the technical detail about that, other than to say most of that technology is mobilized locally, and that's a fundamental point. From centralized to local, and that's the point. And along with that comes two things. One is a description of a disrupted and a transitioning energy economy, and the local opportunity that comes from that to the local economy and job creation that can improve that economy. So simply put, in this picture, we go from local to central to local again. Now that could be argued as a pretty simple argument, but I think that it's technically accurate and supportable. But when you are in a community context and you're talking to stakeholders about what you mean by a transitioning energy economy and the opportunity that comes from it, the challenge and opportunity, if I may say, this is the kind of narrative that can be very useful. And I can say personally, I found it very useful in bringing folks towards a better understanding of why we pursue smart energy communities through community energy planning. So one of the goals of the project was to actually come up with a definition of what we mean by a transitioning energy economy. And we did so. And I've touched on all of these points in my previous slides. We go from central to local. And there's three key attributes that are attached to the benefits that can come to local economies. The increase in ready availability of technologies and services. We'll talk a little bit more about that market and how it is growing and mobilizing. As I've said already, the vast majority of those technologies are implemented locally. And what community energy plans, and this is really talking about energy planning through a slightly different lens, that energy plans create channels for local markets. If you were to talk to any provider of what could be considered a smart energy technology, they're always looking for channels to their markets. They know that those markets largely are located locally and highly disaggregated as a result. So I can tell you that some of those private sector firms that I'm familiar with are very excited to see a movement of communities across Canada, in this particular case, that are creating those channels for their products and services. And of course, the local communities benefit positively and economically through two ways, which is creating a more energy efficient economy and attracting local investment for local energy infrastructure. We'll talk a little bit more about some of those points as we go forward. So what is the current market? And I want to put some context to something that I think most folks don't necessarily have a strong sense of, which is we talk about other economies, you know, iPhone markets, we talk about internet markets, we talk about different markets all the time. We can talk about the transitioning energy market in a very similar way. And I've got some anecdotes here to give you a sense of that scale. It's grown significantly in the last 20 years. You could maybe even expand that to 30 or 40 years if you include the transition that we see in Europe, Northern Europe particularly. As I've said already, that these channels to these markets are driven to a large degree by local governments and higher orders of government that support them. Of course, we talk about local governments, but they are creatures of their provinces who are in turn coordinated with federal government in many ways around infrastructure. And local governments, of course, have a very challenging goal to have interest and purview over their local economies, but don't have necessarily all the levers to initiate activity in those economies. But they are motivated by the positive economic impacts, like every other economic development department in any city has a goal of actually maintaining a healthy economy and attracting jobs. And community energy plans are widely seen, I should say increasingly widely seen, as having a large number of benefits beyond the positive economic impact benefits. And I showed you that on the very first screen. So it's not just about the economy, there's social and health benefits as well. So let's get a sense of scale. Sorry, Charlotte, go ahead.
Yeah, we have a question. So, so we have a question from Terry. How do we demonstrate to the powers, that be utility and regulatory system, that we are underrepresented or under-equipped to be able to attract industry and other economic development, knowing that we have an inferior grid system? And I will share a comment I sent earlier, if that can help to give a bit more of context.
Okay, maybe you could put that in the chat, chat thing so I could have a look. I didn't catch all of that, Charlotte, but what I get from the question is what kind of control that we have over this, the big challenge of influencing a change in the status quo. I think it's a great question, if I understand it correctly, and I get it all the time, and certainly in my travels. I usually say this, is that it's really about following the economy. I think, you know, if you look at the transition of advocacy for this, there's been lots of nonprofits, I've been part of them, many of you have been, that advocated for this transition and the benefits of it. Governments are increasingly seeing it as a valid argument, and we're seeing programs pop up that support them, the different levels of activity at the provincial level. Certainly our government in Ottawa sees, and this really speaks to current times, sees economic recovery and low carbon and sustainability in one picture. So I don't think that it's governments that are going to change the market. I think it's the market that will change the market, if I could be a little glib about that. And it's really a matter of following the market. It hasn't been traditionally thought of that way. I think mostly it's been thought of as a policy thing. But really, and this has been the eye-opener for me personally, I don't mind sharing, is that the market is transitioning despite, in many cases, the lack of policy that we see in certain jurisdictions. I mean, I won't make any judgments about that. And that's what I really wanted to convey in this presentation. So if I understood the question correctly, I'm sorry if I didn't, but hopefully that's an answer. We can come back to it if we need to. Charlotte, I'll just say I'm not seeing the questions pop up. I do have the chat box open. Maybe they're coming in a different way.
Yeah, no, I can post the question on the chat box as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your comments. We have another question if you want to answer right now, or do you prefer to answer at the end?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah, we have another question. Do you want me to just write it on the chat box and take some time at the end of your presentation?
Okay, let's do it that way.
Yeah, okay, sounds good.
Thank you. Okay, so QUEST has done some great work already on this, of getting a sense of the scale of the market. And some of this information comes from some of the partners that QUEST works with. We can see the size of the markets at the 70 billions level in the smart energy communities marketplace. And this is actually, this is current numbers, right? So it already is a very robust market. And I think this is important to talk about, as opposed to something that is kind of starting out or fresh or new, and some of the negatives views that can come with that around it's not affordable, et cetera, et cetera. The market's active already. And the number of companies that are supporting this market is in the 51,000 range. And you know, this is already 2-year-old data, so there's no question that it's bigger now. And the revenue that comes from that activity is in the billions, $82 billion. So you can see that there's some really high level, very significant figures that describe what this transitioning energy economy is doing. These are just snippets that I get. I have my Google alert set for market information that comes in. I get flooded with it all the time. And the reason I do it is just for this discussion. You can see, I mean, I won't read these verbatim, but distributed energy, meaning, you know, disaggregated energy, local, is in the over $500 billion level estimated by 2025. It's worth pointing out that that number is very close to the current automobile market in North America. And that's a fundamental message that I think needs to be included in the narrative, is that the size of the market for transitioning energy products and services is at that scale. It's not young, it's not new, it's not highly risky. And so there's some global numbers around energy efficiency, green buildings. You can see they're all in either double or triple digit billions. And the one I like the most, I think with the biggest opportunity, is the district heating market size across the US is as much as $280 billion by 2024. And these are all from market research firms. So I'm going to transition a little bit to an understanding of how jobs are created. A bit of a qualifier here in that these are fairly high level. Each local economy has its unique attributes, but there's some fundamentals in here that are valid to begin a conversation. And I'm going to talk about them in 3 different ways with highlights on the first 2. Pretty simple when you look at it, about local dollars kept in a community. This actually is and I don't know if the City of London is on the call today, but London was, in my knowledge anyway, one of the first communities to actually use this very focused value proposition, talking to their community about their community energy plan. And then an understanding of you know, how jobs are created, the direct and indirect and induced job creation from local dollars. Anybody who's taken Economics 101 might remember some of this stuff, and it's pretty straightforward. And there's good source material to help make those calculations, and we'll go through it a little bit. The last one is actually a little more difficult to quantify for any given municipality, but it's about new dollars that can be attracted for investment in activities that support CEPs. Not just implementation like retrofitting homes or pipes in the ground, but actually locating the companies that actually provide services to that market beyond your own community. And I often share my own personal experience in Guelph, where we had our community energy plan was 4 or 5 years underway in implementation, and a solar energy company called Canadian Solar, is actually a Chinese company, was looking to locate in Canada, and they found Guelph because at that time we were starting to link some of these messages here around our community energy plan and economic development. And Canadian Solar was looking for a host city that actually had some fundamental principles in common with them, and that brought 500 jobs to Guelph, which was quite substantial for a city of Guelph size. So a little bit of technical thing here. How are jobs created? There's all kinds, and it can get complicated. And we wanted to avoid that. The last thing you want to say to anybody is it's complicated. It doesn't really draw people to you. We are focused in the first one around multipliers. So jobs per $1 million essentially is the metric for that. There are more complicated models that can be done to estimate economic impact. And some of these actually, some communities have dove into some of these other models to get an understanding of their local economies. But at a high level, and for this research project particularly, we use multipliers. So some of this may be familiar to you. I'll go through it quickly. There's really 3 categories how jobs are created. One is direct jobs. So you can just see by the pictures what we mean by that is, you know, direct installation of elements of a community energy plan, integrated community energy plan. We've got renewable and solar, home retrofits with insulation, of course, the design, engineering, and other support services that go with it. The indirect jobs are all the components that go into those technologies. And you can see them here, basically components, the parts that go into elements of these technologies, and the transportation systems that bring them to the job. And last is really where communities are interested in their high-level goal of healthy and happy communities, which is the induced jobs that come with more activity around entertainment, dining, et cetera, et cetera. And it's that last category actually that is the big prize in terms of building a healthy community. So how do we enable this transition? What's the role of the municipality? So this is focused in on municipalities particularly, who are arguably the most powerful or potentially influential stakeholder in any community energy planning activity. I'm going to revisit the QUEST policies again and focus in on the last one. Anybody who's looking to locate or make an investment, locate a factory, or look for opportunities to build their solar company, et cetera, are looking for, and I'll go right to that last one. All of them are important, obviously, but policy and program stability. Communities that telegraph their commitment to achieve energy efficiency goals, greenhouse gas emission goals, and their commitment to it over time, you know, and demonstrated and illustrative commitments to that are what investors are looking for. So that's a very important aspect, and I want to communicate that all the time. I hear that all the time when I talk to investors or companies active in the market. So these are actually excerpts from real plans that I wanted to illustrate. And again, most plans that I have seen have some nod towards local economy, and that's important. What I would advocate for is growing that, is being more articulate and thorough around that argument or that aspiration. So you can see in this particular plan, we have two particular goals around new market opportunities and competitive communities. So this is another kind of conundrum that municipalities have. They cooperate a lot when we collectively advocate through groups like FCM or QUEST. But through an economic lens, municipalities can be actually harsh competitors when they're trying to attract investment. And so the word competitive pops up in some of the community energy plans, particularly in New Brunswick. Now, along with that, I've got it X'd out here, but these same communities have greenhouse gas targets, and they're in a position now to sort of work towards a bit of an empirical understanding of these goals. And I wanted to walk through that a little bit with you. These are straight out of a plan. So this, and I don't mind naming the names, it says here Greater Sussex. Sussex is a community, a smaller community in New Brunswick, has a community energy plan that's established and being pursued in terms of implementation, has two priorities that I pulled out of a longer list of priorities. And this comes from an understanding of their local landscape. So as per my earlier point, that every local economy has its own unique attributes. And they found two, or understood two in their own community. The opportunity for geothermal was understood to be good. There's actually, and this is unique to New Brunswick, there's actually natural gas sources nearby in a province that's pretty lowly served from the natural gas supply system. And along with that is, and that's embedded in their economic development plan. That does not come from a community energy plan. I can tell you that those that fostered forward the economic development plan were highly aware of the activities around the community energy plan. So they were sharing back and forth as they developed these plans somewhat in concert. So you can see at the bottom, the community energy plan, and this is a repeat from the previous slide about creating new market opportunities and build awareness around energy investment and create a culture of energy conservation across the community. I have another one here before I make a final point about this. This is St. John, so a much larger city in New Brunswick that had some really strong economic development goals around energy, and that's in the top line here. Is securing investment, so they had a really top level goal, an economic development goal around bringing investment dollars to their community. To leverage St. John as a regional asset, so they look beyond their own borders and work with their existing foundational strengths around energy infrastructure. And underneath that particular line is they have existing district energy and thermal distribution networks in downtown St. John, and they're looking to grow those. You can see it's the same language embedded in their community energy plan. They did this in cooperation with a number of other communities, including Sussex. So my concluding point here is that economic development is usually driven by plans. Most cities and communities will have an economic development plan. The actors that are involved, that are committed to economic development, are almost always somewhat or significantly embedded within the municipal structure, but every community has a chamber of commerce with hardly any exceptions, or other economic development interests. I can say, this is somewhat anecdotal, but the integration of community energy planning and the benefits of it into local economic development plans is a work in progress, I'll say. Don't see it in some communities, it's not linked at all. And I would argue that this is a mission for all of us, is to try and make that link so that it's understood as a foundation, potential foundation for economic growth for any community. And that the argument for doing it is strong. The scale of the opportunity has reached a critical point, arguably already. And that it's competitive with all the other pillars of economic development that you see in most cities. So in Guelph, for example, agriculture is a pillar. Advanced manufacturing is a pillar. It's easy to argue that the potential market, I should say that the market size in the transitioning energy economy and its potential to bring jobs is competitive with any of those other pillars in terms of its scale of opportunity. So I maybe could pause to see if there's any questions. Charlotte, do we have any more questions?
Yeah, we have some. So I wrote them down on the chat, but I can read it for you. We have especially a question about the job creation opportunity versus the loss as well. So in presenting the job creation opportunity stemming from the CEP or renewable energy, how do you frame the potential loss of jobs from the traditional system being displaced? You know, for example, you may bring the geothermal or biomass heating to a community, but this will result in fewer installations of the traditional system by local installers, for example.
Yeah, okay. I think if I understand that question correctly, and I'll just point out that, again, more detail on the website about this, and potential we can follow up more if there's a conversation any of you would like to have. I think in this section here, there may be at least partial answer to that question. I will say that the need for more work in this area, particularly for more localized scenarios, continues. This is a fairly high level. I don't diminish of its value, but as I've said a number of times already, every municipality is unique. But the fundamentals of the slides I'm about to show you, and I fear I might not be able to get through them all. I will point out again, there's a workbook on the Quest Canada website that really walks through this quite clearly. But one of the fundamentals is we're really talking about transitioning energy investment dollars into a traditional system to a new framework, right? And so it's comparative. And that's going to be the fundamental point I'll show you here, is that the investment in the traditional system is less of a job creator than investment in the elements, we'll say broadly, the elements of a transitioning energy market or a smart energy community. Specific to renewable energy, it's a bit tricky, and that was a challenge in the research project, I don't mind admitting, is that if you were to pick a target, if you were looking for 10% solar PV in your community, and understanding what the job impact might be, really depends on the supply chain to that technology and how local it can be. So an understanding of the resources available, the economic resources available in any community or region is really important to understand renewable energy particularly. And I've told you the story of Guelph, where we got a solar company right in our community. So we were able to see a very clear supply chain from manufacturing through installation to installed systems. So I hope that doesn't sound like a dodge to the question. You're really pointing when it comes to renewables. But what I do want to talk about is really the fundamental argument of keeping dollars local and what that looks like when you talk about really moving dollars from one purpose to another. So again, we've pulled some of this empirically from existing community energy plans in New Brunswick. Most community energy plans have this information in them. And we wanted to make sure that's true. So this is one graphical representation, as you see in most plans, which is how is energy used? How does it break down? Where does it go? What fuels go where? And so you can see here in this particular example, we know the total energy load. It's rather dated baseline 2015. And you can see the majority of that energy use is to electricity and second to transportation. Not dissimilar to most communities. So that's a starting point of understanding how energy is currently being fueled and used in the end use for it. So we need to understand, we want to transition to economic discussion. So what are the costs? We don't have to go through these all together, but again, if you know how your energy breaks down, and you can easily find the unit cost of energy at today's costs, to determine your total energy bill in any community. I would argue this is a fundamental communication point at the start of any effort to look at the economic value, is to get an understanding of the current energy bill for your community. Heating, cooling, lighting, transportation. And if possible, project what those costs are going to be into the future. So many of the community energy plans that I'm involved in take great effort to project the energy cost into the future. And the fundamental, and I don't have that here, but the fundamental argument of doing that, or reason for doing that, is to get an understanding of the inflationary pressures that come from a traditional generation and supply system. And it can be quite profound. Energy costs can double, easily double, and even triple if you push out to 2050. And these are economic pressures that come to communities because the majority of these dollars, as I showed you earlier, leave the community. So this is a bit of an exercise. Most municipalities will have a target around reducing their energy use. I picked a number here. In this example, I would argue a rather modest objective of reducing their energy use by 15% and therefore reducing their energy costs by 15%. And we have a number to work with here, which is $45 million. So again, building an argument here with some empirical data, which is $45 million can potentially stay in this community and be redistributed to other purposes that improve the local economy. Now, this was my earlier point about competitiveness. This is a fairly high level overview of how jobs are created per $1 million of investment. So this is the multiplier approach I referred to in an earlier slide. And even though in your local economy, these numbers might be different, I would say two things. They're not radically different. And more importantly, we're really interested in the comparisons between the two. If you were to take two bars and understand the difference between the two. The ones that I'm going to work with here, and this goes to the workbook that's available online in much more detail and hopefully some good instructions to help you work it if you're inclined to do so. The three red bars are the three that we want to talk about going forward. I just want to do a time check, Charlotte. We're about 1:45 right now.
Yes, we have few questions. Do you want to raise them for the end?
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Okay, sure. So we have a question. Is there an optimal community size for CEP, like how large or how small?
Sorry, I'm not quite understanding the question. Is there a site for community energy?
Like a size, an optimal community size to implement a CEP? Like, is it better to implement that with a large community, or can that work in a small community?
Oh, I see. Thank you. Yeah, I would say it's no different. I mean, every community has its challenges. Obviously, smaller communities are challenged around limited resources and ability to take on, ambitious activity. But the benefits are quite scalable. Everything I'm showing you here does not require a certain scale. And in fact, smaller communities can have resources. And I showed you one there, the town of Sussex. They have unique energy assets in their community, but it's a relatively small community. It's about 5,000 people. So the answer is no. I don't think it really matters how big you are.
Thank you, Rob. Maybe we will have time for another question for you.
Okay.
How do you respond to the utility narrative of utility scale having lowest unit cost?
Sorry, Shada, could you say that again, please?
Yeah, you can also see it. It's the last question on the chat box. It's a question from Erin. So how do you respond to the utility narrative of utility scale having lowest unit cost?
Okay, well, if I understand the question right, that the unit costs of energy are arguably low in some cases, and that, if I understand the question right, this is why I made a reference to the inflationary pressures on energy. If the economics at today's costs are not supportable. And that can happen. I encourage everyone to look at the future energy costs, which there's lots of great reference material that will say that the economic argument, if not strong today, will be strong soon, to put it quite simply.
Right.
Okay. Okay. So I'm just worried I don't have enough time here, so I'm going to go through these quickly.
Sure.
When we look at estimating job creation. So I'm going to go back, oops, I'm going to go back to this slide here and maybe use this as a description. So this comes from the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. I would encourage anybody to go to that site, acAAA.org. There's a really good information there about energy in the economy. It is American-based, granted, but the fundamental principles translate, and there's a lot of good info. This particular graph comes from it, and this is actually one I see all the time. It gets used all the time. And you know, it supports my observation after doing a lot of research that more information on this topic needs to be done more locally. There's not a strong Canadian version of this, although there's some great institutions in Canada that are doing good work, like Efficiency Canada. I don't mean to sound critical of that. But more information around economy and energy into the hands of local governments, into the hands of their community stakeholders could be extremely valuable. So there's three things here. Utility is the category that has 9 jobs in it. That's the status quo. That's the traditional large scale, large infrastructure energy systems. Creates about 9 jobs per million. Construction is a category that's quite broad, but it actually has a great energy overlay in it, which is around home retrofits, particularly retrofitting for solar PV integration, etc. Falls into that bucket. And the observation here really is the difference between 20 and 9 is really a factor of 2. So dollars that don't go to your utility, 80% of which leaves the community, could all be made local as you move into local implementation activities. And that's the fundamental message in this graph. 17 is the average. So that's where you get into the average economy. Every local economy, all in, all things in, creates about 17 jobs. And that's where induced jobs get created. So you can calculate that if you have access to some of the efficiency targets that are embedded in community energy plans, you can start to do calculations. So in the investment phase, I'm just going to go through the top line here. Investment phase, dollars that go into the general economy could be mobilized towards construction, and we have a net of 3 jobs per million. Doesn't sound earth-shattering, but as you can see by most plans, the cost of actually implementing to get to the goals can be in the tens and hundreds of million dollars quite easily. It's the savings phase where you really start to create jobs, and it's almost a factor of 3. In that over 20 years, roughly, a building, for example, that's much more energy efficient has dollars that are not going to the utility, paying utility bills, but actually is going into the local economy at 17 jobs per million. The net effect is 8. And so you can see simply here the factors that go to stimulating local energy activity are really about transitioning dollars from one end use to another. That's a fundamental message. A bit of a warning is that you often see this, and I see a lot of material, and it's not incorrect, that would say home retrofits create 20 jobs per $1 million. Sometimes it varies around that number. That's not wrong, but it's important to know the net job effect. In other words, it's not 20, it's actually 3 more jobs than a typical local economy. That's a fundamental message, bit of a technical one. And here, this is in the workbook, so I won't stop on this. This is kind of a busy slide, but it really is how you take the cost of energy and start to calculate the job benefits. So really, we're taking the example I showed you earlier of saving $45 million and imagining it's its mobilization into a local economy and the effect it can have. And you can see here that we have a calculable outcome that can be made. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to that. This, again, we don't have time to dive into this. There may be some questions, and I'm happy to stay on longer if you want. This is in the workbook. It actually walks you through a little more incrementally to help make some calculations. And the last slide is actually one I've referred to a number of times as we move forward, right? Major market actors. So we've talked about them and the size of the markets that they're acting in. Major companies, recognizable names, see this transitioning energy economy as a huge opportunity. And I can say in no uncertain terms that all these companies are actually making strategic moves towards getting at this market. So they're job creators, they're investors, and they could be creating jobs in any community. And I would argue that the goal is to integrate economic development activities to focus on these. When I worked at the City of Guelph, I was a community energy manager there for 10 years. In the last 4 or 5 years of my time there, I worked in the economic development department. And I learned a great deal about what I'm sharing with you today and led to our drive to do more research in this area. Is that when you're at the table with potential investors, which economic development departments do every day, literally, you're able to look at the community energy plan as a value plus to any potential investor, from small business to large manufacturing, et cetera. And so that's a fundamental message, and where a lot of work, I would say, still needs to be done, is integrating that economic development message. So that brings me to a conclusion with 8 minutes to go. I thank you for your time. We have some more time for questions. I don't know if we have any more, Charlotte?
Yeah, we have some. So is behind the meter generation and franchise issues within the distribution system limits the optimizations of the DER? And you can, again, also you can see all the questions, the chat box.
Okay, I figured out the chat box. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, and I also send a link to the workbook, but we will send you everything, like the presentation.
Thank you.
The links, right?
Yeah.
And I wanted to add that if we don't have time to answer all of those questions, we will make sure to answer all of them personally to you by email. Okay.
Yeah. So we have 2 open questions here. And Erwin has asked a question that's a good question. You know, I feel like I may be dodging the answer, but I'll give it to you, is that really depends on the local economic ecosystem, right? So the providers of products and services towards either large centralized or distributed energy systems. You know, it depends on the local economic landscape. So I referred earlier to economic development activities typically embedded in municipalities. And I did this in my tenure in the City of Guelph in their ECDev department, is that, you know, mapping that landscape became important. So understanding, you know, the job pool there, or the labor pool, the supply systems for any given investor interest, those were the ways you answered that question. So there's no universal answer to it. This sort of drives down to local reality. And so that's how I would answer that question. It's a really good question. And it's one, I think, as you mature and grow the argument around CEPs and ECDev, that you need to answer.
Thank you, Rob. And we have another question here. How do you deal with conflicting mission of municipality and utility? Is there any conflicting mission between them?
Conflicting?
Conflicting mission, yeah, between municipality and utility.
Yeah, well, yes, there can be. And there's no magic answer to that question. I would say a couple things. One is, if you're doing community energy planning, I've referred to stakeholders a number of times here. I can't understate how important it is to have everybody at the table. And I always take the opportunity to encourage everybody to not look at this as good guys and bad guys. It's kind of embedded in my presentation. Even I try and avoid it. You know, the status quo is bad and what we're proposing is good. It's not necessarily that simple. The word transition becomes very important when making that point. I can say that utilities that I've talked to, and it's quite a number over time now, are all aware of this transitioning energy market. They all are. So it's not as though they're not aware of it or they're stubbornly sticking to the old way of doing things. They're trying to understand that transition. My empathy for those interested parties in that centralized infrastructure, if it's your local utility or provincial utility, they have a big challenge in front of them. The investments in that infrastructure that I showed you the pictures of are huge. No one, including ratepayers, all of us, are interested in that being abandoned. Absolutely not. So how do you transition from very large, very expensive infrastructure that won't just disappear because you're talking about something different? It's really understanding its role in a disaggregated energy configuration as defined by smart energy communities. And there's some very motivated utilities that have come to the table. Even in this project, I didn't point this out, and I should, that New Brunswick Power was also a sponsor to this research project because they're interested in answering that question. So what we can see is that utilities' ability to participate in microgrids and play a role in microgrids is quite powerful. Energy trading in a more regional way is another way they can do it. We are not advocating for the grid to disappear. That I can say. It can play a role.
Great, thank you, Rob. I see that we have 2 minutes left. I just wanted to point out the fact that everything, all the materials, the workbook, case studies, and the webpage are also available in French for the French speaker. And Rob, are you okay if people have more questions to contact you directly, either by phone?
Absolutely, of course. My email is there. Or
I just wanted to make sure.
Or contact your QUEST contact and it'll get to me.
Perfect. Okay, maybe we will have time to one last question. Okay. Is there a role for a 3P in investment and operation of a utility door concept?
I'm just looking for that question.
Yeah. You know, again, I will make sure that we will answer all of your questions. Obviously, we don't have time to answer all of them right now, but we'll make sure to follow up with you.
Okay. Okay. You're seeking ways in which a 3P system can thrive under our regime. Yeah, okay, so you're politely dismissed by your utility. Okay, sorry, Terry, I was having trouble getting to your question. I would love to have a longer chat with you about this because you're really getting to some of the sort of institutional relationships that can be a challenge here, if I can take it to that level. Utilities have a hard time, as I've said before, transitioning. I mean, their transition could happen at a rate that's slower than we'd like to see. You know, I always try and find an empathetic position when we're talking about utilities. Their ability to take renewables on their grid can be quite limited in terms of their capacity and all that. There's lots of technical reasons for it. And so talking to them about transitioning towards a broader generation mix I have found to be open. I can say with NB Power, for example, they do want to get to a place where there's a wide range of technologies providing power to their grid, renewable technologies. They're not against it. It's just very difficult for them to manage a traditional grid and then start transitioning or including what we would broadly call renewable energy. But it doesn't mean they don't want to. So I think coordinating strategically today and into the future with your utilities starts to open that conversation. What doesn't work is, I think, what you allude to, which is banging on the door, let us in, we want to connect right now. I think understanding their challenge is an important thing because it really builds the relationships and the cooperation. But I've not yet met a utility that has not acknowledged this transitioning energy market and an effort to understand their role in it. That I can say with confidence.
Awesome, thank you, Rob. Well, I think we can wrap up here. We had great feedback, so thank you, Rob. That was a very interesting webinar, and we will make sure that we will send you everything, the presentation. We also record this webinar, so we will send you the recording, and we will also send you a survey, so it will be greatly appreciated if you can respond to it.
Thank you, Charlotte, and thank you all those who attended today. Thanks very much. I hope you stay safe.
Thank you, Rob. Bye.
Bye-bye.